who is performing this year at the 12th Annual Outsound Music Summit. So, Kyle, tell me, why music? Try something different tonight. Yeah. What was it? Where did the musical bug bite you? When did it bite you?
Oh my God. Pretty early on. I mean, if we go back to the beginning, actually, you should swing around the camera at some point because that axe right there.
I will.
That mighty Wurlitzer that came into my life in 1970.
The mighty Wurlitzer.
That particular one.
Yeah.
I started taking organ lessons when I was 6 years old.
Well, that's something I don't hear very often.
Yeah. It was the organ rather than the piano, just because friends of my parents were an organ teacher and an organ repairman.
Really?
Yeah. We'd go to Long Island every Thanksgiving to have Thanksgiving with them, and it was the 70s, and the corner of the living room was this humongous machine with flashing lights and a Leslie and Bossa Nova beats. It was the coolest toy I had ever seen at that point. So
But you said you were 6?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I decided I wanted one, and my parents thought about it and said, okay, if you take lessons and you practice at least a half hour every day, we'll get one.
So was it piano lessons or actual Wurlitzer lessons?
It was on the organ, yeah. I started on the Lowry, and then after it was clear that I wasn't giving up, they got that thing, and my parents have actually been dragging it across the country from house to house ever since. When we moved in here, they said, and finished up the studio that we are currently sitting in, my parents said, okay, you're taking the organ back, and it's awesome. That's where I compose, that's where I
really
plunk out notes and make sure that what I'm hearing actually has some correspondence in the real world.
You're right. Because, most of us, I think I could go down the list, start on the piano, and then, but you're like, I started on Wurlitzer.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's great.
And everything that came with it, being a choir boy in church and subbing for my teacher in church services every once in a while, and then fourth grade hit, public school band. The oboe was the weirdest looking instrument of the lot. I actually wanted to be a bassoonist at first. But we couldn't find a student model bassoon in the local band store.
Okay.
So the oboe was closely related, and I'm still stuck with it 30-odd years later.
Huh.
It took me a couple of years to figure out that that the oboe was more portable and more fun, because I could actually play with my friends and go on band trips, and I didn't have to go to church anymore in order to play the oboe. So there was a shift there.
Right.
Somewhere around puberty.
Well, so you started playing the oboe when you were a teenager?
Fourth grade.
Okay.
Fourth grade, yeah.
So a couple of years later, you graduated from Wurlitzer to oboe.
Yeah.
Again, it's not something you hear every day. And you've been playing the oboe for quite some time. So double reeds have been pretty much in your life from a very early age.
Yeah, and it's really all I play. I mean, a lot of folks, if they play oboe or bassoon, usually start on clarinet or flute or trumpet, and then we'll switch when they get to middle school.
Right. My
band director just let me take a crack at it because I already had some musical background for a few years.
Oh, okay. So besides the bossa nova of the Wurlitzer, and the neatness of the strange double reed instrument, as time went on, obviously, I mean, were you listening to music at the same time, or as you grew? And what was your listening like as you were in band, and
It's funny because when I'm talking through the personal narrative, and writing bios and grant applications and everything, I always tend to fixate on adolescence and the move from there into college and all the transitions that happened there. But actually, through writing this piece, I have been going back a lot farther, and I've really been kind of acknowledging how much playing Bach since the time I was 6 is really at my core in a way that I didn't fully realize. And it cropped up in surprising ways in the piece, actually, which you will hear on the 27th. But simultaneous with that, I mean, sitting around the dinner table playing Sorry after dinner. My parents were put on Spike Jones records, and what else? A lot of just very silly, kitschy stuff. I remember Stan Freberg, and that sort of slapstick big band twisted kaleidoscope take on the Great American Songbook is very much rearing its ugly head in this piece.
Very storytelling orientation.
Storytelling, but
Yeah,
also this kind of like fractured,
Yeah.
parody and satire running simultaneously with a love letter to the tradition of vaudeville and Broadway and just things that I wouldn't have expected.
You're the second composer this year at Summit that mentioned Bach as the beginnings of listening inspiration.
Yeah.
And you're both very different practitioners. Fernando Lezcano Lopez, who's performing one of his tape pieces from Karma in Stanford, said something very similar to what you've just said in terms of the classical point of Bach being very inspiring.
Yeah.
At an early age.
Yeah.
I think I need to go dust off my Bach selection and just try to recall what that's all about.
Yeah.
So, and were there any living musicians that as well, like live performances that you've experienced, or other oboists for that matter that maybe have had an impact, or other double reed players or single reed players?
Well, I mean, if we fast forward a few years, definitely when I was in college working college radio, a lot of it was, for starters, just hearing recordings of, in particular at first, was Anthony Braxton, Evan Parker, Peter Brooksman. Those were basically and John Zorn. Those were really the things that kind of enabled me to find a middle ground between the hardcore and post-punk stuff that I got mixed up in when I was an adolescent, and the simultaneous strain of the nice boy in the youth orchestra playing the oboe.
So you're playing oboe and listening to punk music in the early years, and then you've. What's interesting is one could almost say, a lot of folks say that free jazz is kind of original punk in a way.
Absolutely,
so it makes kind of sense that you would hit that.
Yeah, but it took me. I mean, it's kind of shameful how long it took me to figure that out, and part of it was just a function of what I had access to. The college radio station in the town when I was growing up got me hooked on Minor Threat and Dead Kennedys and that whole era of American hardcore, and then I started getting really into industrial and more experimental, timbrally focused weirdo music.
So during your college years, were you still on the East Coast?
No, college was in Houston, Texas.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I landed there in the conservatory, in the music school there.
Right.
And same deal, still trying to keep up the orchestra chops while I was still playing punk bands, and discovering the world of free jazz and creative music was really what made everything make sense.
What were you playing in the punk bands?
This thing.
The Moog.
Actually, yeah, analog synthesizers and electric accordion, and occasionally electric oboe as well.
Okay. Electric oboe.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty nasty, but
I'm sure. I hope so. It's punk, right?
Yeah. Well, you plug anything through the same pedals,
Just
and
distorted.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay.
So yeah, the hearing some of the classics of creative music, free jazz, European improvised music really kind of turned my head around. In terms of double reed players, they're really very, very few as models, but I was, while in the music school, I was becoming aware of a lot of the things that Heinz Holliger was doing with the Darmstadt composers, in the world of avant-garde new music. And at the same time, I started hearing Sun Ra records and hearing Marshall Allen pick up the oboe every once in a while. It completely blew my head off. So that was, that was yet another beginning of, okay, there's another path is.
So there's a way.
Possible.
It was like there's a way to do this in a different method.
Yeah. And I've told this story 1,000 times now in various settings, but like if I want to like pinpoint one pivot, it was a concert on campus at Rice, at Rice University in Houston, that the campus radio station sponsored in 1993, that featured the Splatter Trio, the Rova Saxophone Quartet, Tim Byrne and Hank Roberts, and Debris, which was a band from Boston. A lot of those guys are still active in seeing those guys play that music live, it was really the first time I'd seen creative music live as something other than, a record that was somehow even more alternative than the alternative I was already listening to. And seeing that in the recital hall where I had, played Bach, where I'd played Brahms, where I'd slept through my friends' recitals, it made it immediately apparent to me that, okay, I have to do this. And it is, it's been a long and crazy path that I've landed out in the Bay Area, but I am...
Home of the Splatter Trio.
Exactly. I'm eternally grateful that those guys that really were my heroes and catalysts for me are now my colleagues.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
It's kind of funny how that works.
It is funny. Did you know that when you came here? Or did you?
I knew they were out here.
Yeah.
And I had vaguely kept in touch with Gino in particular in the interim. I came out here to visit a couple times before I moved in 2003 and wound up doing some stuff with Miles at his at Gorilla Audio.
Miles Boyson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes.
No, that's all right.
We're talking to the...
Some folks may not know who Splatter Trio is. Gina Robert, Miles Boyson, and...
Dave Barrett.
Dave Barrett. Right.
Yeah, my first gig when I moved here in 2003 was Gino's 40th birthday.
So 10 years later, here you are hanging out.
Here I am.
It's
been a decade, it really has.
Yeah, right. So at that point, were you composing, or did the compositional process kind of start later, or when was that? When did that kind of fall into your lap, so to speak?
Again, it kind of snuck up on me. I mean, I was, for all intents and purposes, I was the primary songwriter in pretty much all the punk bands that I was in from high school on, lead singer, frontman. So I was composing all along, but because of the conservatory damage that I was permitting to be inflicted upon me, in the music school, I kind of devalued what I was doing. I said, oh, that's not real composing. I know what real composing is. This is songwriting. This is messing around. This doesn't count. I'm making funny noises and it's juvenile. And it was a very gradual process that I started owning that, no, this is serious. This actually counts. This is real. The fact that it speaks to me in a more immediate way than even my favorite music of the classical tradition. And I do still love it, and I play it, and it's how I earn most of my living, actually. But I finally got to the point where I realized, no, I don't have to apologize about this. I just have to frame it appropriately, and I have to recognize that I don't compose in the same sort of way that people who people who write who notate as much as possible of what's going to happen from beginning to end in the piece. I respect that discipline. I respect that tradition. I spend a lot of time interpreting music that's written like that, but I finally realized, no, that's not what I do, and that's not what I have to do. What I do is I compose for improvisers, and I compose in ways that maximize opportunities for musicians I know and love to show their stuff and to have fun. And it's really only within the past 5 years or so that I started saying, no, damn it, I'm a composer. Yes, I'm a composer. I started identifying as such, and surprise, surprise, now other people are telling me I'm a composer, so I'll buy it. I'm gonna run with it as fast as I can.
Right. So not a whole lot of time in terms of where it's somewhat recent in a way in terms of official acceptance. Yeah. It sounds like within what you've been doing, but still conceptually, if you look back, you've been composing for quite some time. Forever, yeah. Right. So it's grown organically. That's what I would call it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and as I've stepped into it, I mean, my skills, my command of the discipline has obviously increased, and I have no delusions about what I can and can't do, but I'm always trying to extend it, and this piece is really the most ambitious thing I've done to date, and it's I honestly the freedom that having the Chamber of Music America New Jazz Works grant in hand, what it did for me was it basically enabled me to say, you know what, it's actually my job this year to sit down and compose. I can set aside time every day where I sit down at the Mighty Wurlitzer with a pencil and with manuscript paper, and I hammer out ideas. And it's not something I have to apologize for. It's not something that I have to fit in between my pain gig. It's actually my gig for this year. And I definitely found that as I got into that rhythm, it really started to flow, and more and more of the fundamental skills that I've been using all along and things that I learned at the music school were still there, and it was humbling and kind of awesome to see that all.
Yeah, so what you're talking about, and for our viewers to understand, is that you're talking about the piece that you're going to be presenting in about 2 weeks from the time of this video recording. Tell us a little about more about like the title of it and what that means to you, and how that's going to unfold, or at least somewhat how you think that might unfold at Summit this year.
Yeah, it's I'm going to try to keep this
or
brief.
Well, that's okay. Take your time.
Well, I've been obsessing over this all year.
Right. So there's a lot there, and I'd be really interested to hear about this piece personally, and I think other people would too.
Okay. Well, the piece is called "Awaits Silent Tristero's Empire." It's written specifically for my ensemble Wrack, W-R-A-C-K, which is I refer to it as a creative music quintet. It's roughly in the avant-garde jazz tradition, but it's as much about, there's as much Ligeti and Xenakis and minor threat and Einstürzen and Neubauten in there as there is Ornette Coleman and et cetera, et cetera. But it's an improvising quintet that I started in Chicago in 2002, just before I moved out here. I've done my best to keep it afloat long distance. It's a really tremendous and very specific free jazz and beyond community. There's a scene in Chicago that I really love, and that it's been very important to me to maintain ties with. And Wrack has kind of always been the vehicle through which I do so. I proposed this piece to Chamber Music America, and when I got the grant, it was suddenly wow.
Last year, right?
Yeah, it was 2012. It's like, so I finally get to do this. I get to take this crazy idea and make it real. So it is for the original version of the quintet, with which the instrumentation is I'm playing oboe and English horn, bass clarinet, viola, bass, and drums, percussion. In the very first incarnation of the group, there's a trombonist named Jeb Bishop who was part of it. So I was able to drag him back in for this, and I'm adding Darren Johnston, one more local musician in there to kind of,
which is good.
Well, yeah. Part of the idea was I really wanted to kind of bridge. It's part of a moving towards committing more fully to Bay Area music. I mean, there's lots of stuff that I've got mixed up in here, but I really haven't composed for anything or started a band in that sense. So this is a baby step in that direction.
Right.
Darren Johnson's a trumpet player, so now in this quintet I've got 2 brass, 2 woodwinds, 2 strings, and percussion. The possibilities are downright orchestral. It's been really fun being able to work with sub-combinations of the pairings. The piece itself is based on Thomas Pynchon's first 3 novels, V, The Crying of Lot 49, and Gravity's Rainbow. When I pitched this proposal in the first place, I had only read V and The Crying of Lot 49, and I was going to stick with that. But as it came together, I thought, you know what, Gravity's Rainbow has been sitting on my shelf for more than a decade. I'm finally going to read it. And when I got into it, I couldn't stop. It was completely addictive. The premise of the piece, the crazy shtick of it, for those who are not familiar with Thomas Pynchon, he's kind of the reigning bad boy of American postmodern fiction. I absolutely love his work. It's obnoxious, it's preposterous, it's over the top. It's
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. and so it was kind of, I definitely I have an attraction in music to audaciousness and to things that are a little much, a little ridiculous, a little extreme, which I can trace back to the Spike Jones records I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you were telling me.
I grew up in Charles Ives' hometown and encountered his music at a very, very early, very impressionable age too, and I that definitely warped me in the best possible ways. So yeah, there was just a lot of resonance in these books. They felt like home to me. The particular hook was that in all three of these books and more recent novels of his as well, his characters break into song all the time. It's completely ridiculous. It's this very artificial conceit where it's like suddenly you step into this awful musical. And the lyrics they're hilarious. They're usually quite bawdy, occasionally downright obscene. They are very silly and full of awful puns and just bad rhymes and silly verbal play all over the place. But Pynchon's grasp of American popular culture is so good that you know what all of them are supposed to sound like. It's like and sometimes he's very specific. Sometimes he says, sung to the tune of so and so. But usually it's you get two lines into it and you're like, oh my God, this is the worst show tune I've ever heard. This is the one that goes yada da 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 da. And so I found that I was hearing melodies as I read these books, dating all the way back to college when I first encountered them. So the idea's been percolating forever, but this was, okay, I'm actually going to sit down and I'm going to write melodies for those songs. And I wanted to do it instrumentally. That was really important to me. I didn't want to have a singer on stage. This was not...
But there were words for these songs.
Yeah.
So did they play any part in the melodic construction?
Oh,
of
yeah,
these?
absolutely.
Yeah.
That was the thing. It was I was really very explicit about setting the words. Okay, so it's like if anybody actually wanted to do the digging, they would find that they match note for note. Repeated verses that have slightly different metrical changes. I changed the melody. I didn't just let it cycle with the same melody. But the stupid idea was since my own jazz training is kind of sketchy. To be honest, I mean, we've talked about the other musical worlds I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And here I've got this, jazz composer mantle.
Yes, you
placed
do.
upon me, So I felt like I had to contend with it in a way that was honest and authentic and made sense to me, but was also a little wise-assed at the same time. So in school I had to try to play over changes. Occasionally I had to improvise over. I got rhythm chord changes, which is, for those who don't know, the sort of thing that's absolutely central to the bebop tradition. It sounds ridiculous on an oboe when you try to do it. So I just, it's not where I come from, and it's also, to my ears, it just wasn't worth bothering. But I completely respect people that have gone through that ringer. So what this was about was, well, since I don't really have the jazz tradition under my belt, what if I reverse engineer a crazy parallel universe jazz tradition? So I was writing these as if they're old Tin Pan Alley and show tunes that have been around for 100 years, that have kind of devolved into the DNA for this bizarre parallel universe fake jazz tradition. That's more about free jazz and more about the AACM and et cetera, et cetera. So,
wow.
Yeah, so I set the melodies, I set the lyrics to the melodies, and I basically threw them in a blender to see what would happen. It's turned into, I mean, we're going to find out a few days beforehand once everybody flies out here.
That's
but
right.
I think the piece is probably going to be about an hour. We'll rein it in for the festival a little if we have to.
Okay.
we can talk about that off camera.
Well, you are closing out the event, so you can play as long as you need to.
But you might want.
I mean, there's not going to be anybody out there going, "Hey, the other band's got a set up." So you could do that, and it sounds to me like it's going to demand that kind of.
We will see.
But I guess until you get everybody together to actually put together. But
and obviously the structure is open ended, and there's loads of room for improvisation.
Wow.
So we can stretch out or not. But it's this overarching arc of 3 movements, each of which is a collage of songs from those 3 books in order.
Wow. Well, it sounds like I think you answered my question pretty clearly, and if anyone's watching, when you're watching this, if you're not interested in coming out on the 27th, then I don't know what's wrong with you. But so that being said, you're gonna this world debut, which we're really happy to have you guys at this year. That's a lot of what Outsound does is we open the door up for further exploration. That's what we're trying to do. So from there, have you had any inklings as to maybe what you may be moving on to after you've done that? Or are you continuing this project on and maybe it'll morph into other things?
Well, I mean, this particular piece, I'm going to try to, it's been a lot of work, so I'm going to try to milk it as much as I can. We are at least performing it the next couple of days after the festival in LA and Sacramento. I'm going to be playing it a couple times in the Midwest next year. We'll be recording it immediately after the festival as well, so there will be a CD someday.
Great.
Wrack went to Europe last year. I got to do that again, and this may very well be the catalyst that gets gets the promoters to answer my emails one more time.
Well, let's hope so. Yeah.
I am definitely moving towards trying to start a similar ensemble here in the Bay Area, which is something I've needed to do for a long time. I've been doing more and more electronic music these days, in part because it's fun. It's, in a sense, it's easier in a weird. I've got you just saw Naima inside. My daughter is now 5, so getting out in the evenings when I'm not playing is sometimes difficult and requires some negotiation with my wife and everything. So doing solo electronic music is something that I can do right here. And so that's kind of taken over some of the compositional energy, but I'm definitely trying to recommit also to, once again, to getting out live, improvising and composing for folks in town.
Great. Wow. Well, sounds like it'll be a fun and intense set to me.
I can't wait. I just hope it's as funny to everybody else as it is to me, because it cracked me up every step of the way.
Yes, but have you practiced trying not to laugh while your own performance is happening?
I've never been a particularly good straight man, so I don't know.
We'll have to see, right. Great. Well, thanks a lot for talking with me. I really appreciate it. And for those of you watching, Kyle Bruckmann's Wrack will be performing on July 27th at the 12th Annual Outsound Music Summit, and you can check things out at outsound.org/summit.
So, see you there. Thank you.
Thank you.